Al-Ma'mun al-Abbasi, his killer, looked at one of the companions of the Imam who happened to be there. His name was Harthama. The Imam said to him, Harthama, don't you believe that an Imam can only be prepared for burial and buried by another Imam? He said, yes, we do. Which, again, tells you that this is a predominant belief that we've had for centuries. He said to him, if that's the case, then where is the Imam? We know that Imam al-Jawad was in Medina at the time, and Imam al-Ridha was in Khurasan. And we are the ones who are washing him, and we're the ones who are going to bury him. Harthama said to Ma'mun, he said, it's an interesting coincidence because Imam al-Ridha had told me that you're going to ask me this question. And he gave me the answer. He said, well, what did he tell you? He said to tell you, Harthama said, he said, the Imam asked me to tell you that even though you cannot see it, but it's Imam al-Jawad who is preparing him for burial and will bury him. And I have a theory about that, which I don't want to get into now because it's going to open a Pandora's box of questions and we only have half an hour as to how that may be possible. But, and this theory, I believe, actually answers a lot of questions about some of the more miraculous things in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. But he said that even though you can't tell, you can't see it, but it's Imam al-Jawad who is preparing him. There is another incident when Imam al-Kadhim, our seventh Imam, was buried. Imam al-Ridha, so Imam al-Kadhim was in Baghdad. Imam al-Ridha was where? In Medina. So Ali al-Bata'ini, who was the representative of Imam al-Kadhim, who later rebelled against Imam al-Ridha and refused to acknowledge his imamah, Ali ibn Abi Hamza al-Bata'ini, a very famous and quite significant personality who decided to announce that he was the representative of Imam al-Kadhim and that Imam al-Kadhim was in fact ascended to the heavens and he didn't die. And so he refused to acknowledge Imam al-Ridha's imamah. Ali ibn Abi Hamza al-Bata'ini said to Imam al-Ridha one day, he said to him, you were in Medina and your father was in Baghdad. How did you manage to do this? How is this possible? Imam al-Ridha told him, do we not believe that Imam Hussain was buried by Imam al-Sajjad a mere 3 days after the day of Ashura? Ali ibn Abi Hamza said, yes, we do. He said, well, how is that possible? How did Imam al-Sajjad come from Medina when he was in captivity from rather Kufa? He was in captivity, he was a prisoner of war. How did he come back to Karbala to bury Imam al-Hussain? If that's possible, well, I'm not in captivity. It's easier for me to go. Again, from a very superficial perspective, if you're in captivity and you can do it, then surely if you're not in captivity, then you could do it as well. So Ali ibn Abi Hamza al-Bata'ani acknowledged that that is in fact true, and that at least it's conceivable and possible. As to what actually happened, historians say, and the hadiths of the Ahlul Bayt in fact say, that the tribe of Bani Asad after 3 days gathered around and they went to Karbala. But they were too afraid to approach the bodies because they knew that there were orders not to touch the bodies and to leave them to be eaten by vultures and by beasts. And so they were just observing, deliberating, should they proceed, should they go back? And that's when they saw a man approaching on horseback who was masked. So when they saw him, he said, are you here to bury the bodies? They said, no, 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 we're just here to see what's happening. He said, no, by God, you're here thinking about burying the bodies. And then he removed the mask, and it was Imam al-Sajjad, and the fourth Imam who had come. And so then he asked them to dig a big hole for the companions of Imam al-Hussain, and they laid the bodies of the companions next to each other in that hole. Then he said, dig another grave, especially for Habib ibn Mudahir. And so the way Imam al-Sajjad planned the burials is absolutely incredible. And I met this doctor in Iraq many years ago who had written an article about how the location And the placement of these graves and these mausoleums was very deliberate, very well crafted and planned, and there was some divine backing for all of this. So he said, dig a grave especially for Habib ibn Mudahar. That's why he has his own darih. Then he said, let's dig another large grave for the family of Imam Hussain, right? Al-Qasim, Abdullah ibn al-Hasan, the brothers of Abil Fadl al-Abbas, they were all buried there. Then the Imam said, is there someone, who's left? They said, well, there is a body laying by the bank of the Alqami, Abil Fadl al-Abbas. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin went there, and with their help, he buried Abil Fadl al-Abbas over there. Then they came back, and Imam al-Hussain, Imam al-Sajjad, buried Ali al-Akbar, where he is now, which is in the direction of the feet of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. He was buried there. Then they came to help him bury Imam al-Hussain. And that's when he said, no, I have help. I don't need your help. Only an Imam buries an Imam. And so Imam Zayn al-Abidin went, and he told them to bring a mat. بِأَبِي أَنْتَ وَأُمِّي يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ اللَّهِ. They brought a mat, and he began to collect the body parts of Abu Abdullah and placed them on that mat, including on one occasion they saw the Imam bend down and pick something from the ground, and he kissed it and put it over his eyes. They said, we asked him, what is that? He said, that is the finger of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. So then the Imam, as I said, he told them that I don't need your help. إِنَّ لِي مَنْ يُعِينُنِي. I have people who will help me. And I saw a hadith which says that Salama was sleeping, and she woke up one night or the next morning, and she was crying. They told her what happened. She said that I just saw the Prophet who came in my dream, and he was dusty from head to toe. There was dust covering his hair and his beard, and disheveled. And I said to him, Ya Rasulullah, why do you look like this? He said, Al-ana raja'tu min dafni waladi al-Husayn. I just came back from the burial of my son, Imam al-Hussain. So when Imam al-Sajjad said, I have help, he's talking about Rasulullah, he's talking about Amir al-Mu'mineen, Fatima al-Zahra. And that is how Imam al-Hussain was buried. And of course, at the end of all that, the last person to be buried was Imam Hussein's 6-month-old infant that Imam al-Sajjad placed on the chest of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. And so that is essentially what happened in terms of the burial when Imam al-Sajjad came back. And of course, you know, captivity or no captivity, the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt don't perform miracles every day, not for convenience sake. But there are times when miracles are performed for more than just establishing the truth of their claim. That is ultimately what a miracle is for, right? It's to establish that this is truly a prophet, this is truly an imam. Jesus raises the dead, Musa parts the sea. These things are required to prove to the world that I am indeed a prophet, an apostle, a messenger from God. But sometimes miracles are performed not just for that purpose, but also because there is a principle to adhere to. And in this case, the principle is, Al-Imam La yatawallahu illa imam. Only another imam can bury an infallible imam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. If you have any questions, inshallah, I'll be at your service. And don't be shy, by the way. Don't look around you. Yes.
Can you explain the authenticity and the musnad of Ziyarat al-Nahya and the reliable sources? Question.
In terms of Ziyarat Nahya or generally speaking?
Yeah, the conversation around Ziyarat al-Nahya and its authenticity.
Oh, there's no question that Ziyarat al-Nahya is authentic. Ziyarat al-Nahya is an incredible, mind-blowing text in and of itself, even if it didn't have a chain of narration. The content of the ziyarah itself is more than sufficient to point to the fact that it came from the sacred direction of the Imam. But Ziyarat al-Nahya, along with a whole host of other scriptures, were passed down to us from the 4 emissaries. These 4 emissaries, the representatives, the deputies of Imam al-Zaman, starting with Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri and his son and Hussain ibn Ruh. These were people who were recognized by the Shia unanimously to represent Imam al-Zaman. There was no question about it. There's a lot of proof, a lot of evidence to back that claim up. There are miracles that they performed. They had knowledge of the unseen that they shared with people and was verified and tested. Because, let's face it, at the end of the day, the Shia are not naive people. The followers of the Ahlul Bayt have been through too much to just be so naive and simplistic as to believe any claim that's made, right? They're the kind of people, it's like the story of those who came from Qum, and their mission, they were on a mission to identify the 12th Imam. So they came, and Imam al-Hasan al-Askari has passed away. He was martyred at that point. So they went to his house. And the person who was in charge was Imam Hasan al-Askari's brother, Ja'far, who now he's known as Ja'far al-Kadhab, because he claimed to be the Imam. So these people came, and they said to him that we are here looking for the next Imam. We believe in 12 Imams. It's incontrovertible that there are 12 Imams. The hadith of the Prophet, the hadiths of, there's overwhelming evidence in Sunni books that there's going to be 12 Imams, right? And Ayatollah Safi Gulpaigani, who's one of the Mirage, I think the oldest Marja now, may Allah bless him and give him a long life, he has written a book which I believe is in response to certain misconceptions that were raised in the community many years ago, right? The book is about establishing the proof of Imam al-Zaman, and it's called Muntakhab al-Athar fi Ahwal al-Imam al-Thani Ashar. Highly recommended read, by the way. Muntakhab al-Athar fi Ahwal al-Imam al-Thani Ashar by Ayatollah Safi Gulpaigani. Look it up, it's available in English. And in that book he mentions all of the traditions where the Prophet not only says that there is going to be 12 Imams, but he lists their names, one after the other. And so these people came from Qum, they saw Ja'far, who was the Imam's own brother, so you'd be excused if you mistook him for the Imam, because he's making that claim, he's the brother of an Imam, a son of an Imam. But they're not stupid, so they said to him, okay, prove it to us, show us that you're an Imam. He said, well, how? They said, we'll have a lot of letters that we brought from Qum, and these letters contain questions for the Imam. And we have been taught by our previous Imams that they have knowledge of the unseen. He said, well, what do you want? They said, okay, we want you to respond to the questions without even reading them. You should know the contents of those letters. He said, you're liars, you're attributing knowledge of the unseen to my brother. My brother never claimed that, it's all a lie. And then he said, I'm going to report you to the government as apostates and as people who commit heresy and whatnot. My point is that the 4 emissaries of Imam al-Zaman were tried and tested time and again. And Ziyarat al-Nahiya is narrated by them. Hope that answers the question. Apologies for taking too long. Jazakumullah khair. We got to take a question from the sister's side. Yes.
Was it after 1 year or just within the 40 days?
Look, I think that question, first of all, I believe it's possible for them to go back within 40 days. It would be tough, it would be difficult, yes. But I think it's at least conceivable. It's not completely out of the question, categorically impossible for them to go back within 40 days. So I know that. And we also know, so this might help clear up some of the confusion, right? If you track the movement of the caravan from Karbala to Kufa, and then from Kufa throughout the Muslim nation, including Palestine, including Egypt, including all of those lands, to finally arrive in Damascus, right? It would take a very long time indeed. Right? It would almost be impossible to do that within 40 days. However, my personal belief is that there were 2 caravans. You've probably never heard this before. And if you don't want to accept it, that's fine, but that's my theory. There were 2 caravans. The first caravan carried the sacred heads of the martyrs, which went through all of those places, and it would be able to do so quite rapidly, because it's an army, it's soldiers, they're carrying these spears, they go through all of these places, they go to Palestine, they go to Syria, they go to Aleppo, they go to all of these cities. And the other caravan was the one that was accompanied by the women and the children. And that caravan only went to two places, Kufa and Sham. Which is why you only hear two sermons of Lady Zainab. You only see her coming to the fore, as well as Imam Zain al-Abidin, in those two locations. And I believe that both of these caravans arrived in arrived in Damascus at around the same time. In fact, the women and the children, the captives, arrived before the sacred heads, which is why when they arrived, they stood at the gate known as Babu Sa'at. The ruins of this still exist in Damascus. When they arrived at that gate, Yazid ordered the caravan to wait for 3 days before entering Damascus, for two reasons. The first was for the sacred heads to arrive, so they could all enter together. And we have a lot of indications about how they had not seen those sacred heads all this time. And in fact, even Lady Zainab had not seen the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein on a spear, on a lance, until that time, right? That was the first reason. The second reason was because they were getting ready to throw the festivities and to decorate the city of Damascus. And that took 3 full days to prepare for the caravans to then come in. So I believe it's possible, if you consider that possibility, that they would in fact be released after only a few days in Damascus, right? And they were allowed to go back because the tables turned, because the tide turned against Yazid. After the sermon of Imam Zain al-Abidin, that was the end of Yazid as far as he was concerned. And so he quickly, rapidly sent the caravans back. In fact, he said, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad killed Imam al-Hussein. I didn't order to kill him. And then he held a majlis for Imam al-Hussein. He said, people should come and give me condolences. They should pay me respect because I am from Quraysh, and Quraysh is the tribe of Imam al-Hussein. And so the tables immediately turned against them, which is when he sent them back to Medina. Hope that answers the question. Listen, don't be shy. Ask whatever questions you have. If I don't know the answer, I'll just say I don't know it.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. So I have a question. In a few minutes ago, you said about imam, only imams can bury imams. And I've heard somewhere, and I just want to ask whether there's a hadith about it. Then when our 12th imam, Hazrat Mahdi Sahib Zaman, and we all have to die one day. So, who will he be buried by? And I have heard that Imam Hussain will come. And miracles, like you said, that they can come when there is. So I just wanted to ask you about that is there's a hadith about it.
So one of the beliefs of the Shia, which regrettably, unfortunately, isn't talked about as much as we should, is the concept known as the raj'ah, which literally translates as the return. And what that means, what that entails, is that after, in fact, when Imam al-Zaman ends his occultation, there's going to be people who will be brought back to life. The first batch of companions that will come to life and support Imam al-Zaman will be the martyrs of Karbala. It'll be the companions of Imam al-Hussein. Each and every single one of them will be brought back to life. Then it'll be the martyrs of the Battle of Badr. Then it'll be others and others. In fact, the hadith tell us that the best of the best and the worst of the worst will be brought back to life. The best of the best, because they will get the chance to fight in the cause of Imam al-Zaman. The worst of the worst, in order to face the justice that they did not face in their lifetimes. They will be put on trial, and they will receive their due punishment during the reign of Imam al-Zaman. It's God's government of justice and equity. The earth will be filled with justice after it's been filled with oppression. And so The raj'a will begin with Imam al-Zaman. Then traditions tell us that after Imam al-Zaman, Imam Hussain will come back to life, and they will get to rule over the earth and the entire universe. By that time, brothers and sisters, I believe, it's my firm belief, that we will be exploring nearby galaxies. At that time, science will be completed by Imam al-Zaman. Traditions tell us that if the collective scientific discovery of mankind was one part, Imam al-Zaman will add another 12 parts to it. Imagine that. We will be exploring nearby galaxies. We will be discovering new worlds out there with new species and alien species and whatnot. And so Imam al-Hussain will come back to life, and Imam al-Zaman will be buried in Karbala. He will be buried in the shrine of Imam al-Hussain. Inshallah. I know this is probably a lot to process for people who have never heard about this, but there are some resources out there. I would urge you to maybe read up on this, look it up, because it's one of those really beautiful, promising things about our beliefs in the end of days, right? The return of Imam al-Zaman. It's not just about, oh, okay, now we'll get someone, a leader who's charismatic and powerful, and he's going to defeat all evil. No, no, there's a lot more to it. This is God trying to prove that this is God giving victory to His servants. Inna, the Quran says, لَنَنْصُرُ رُسُلَنَا وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَيَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْأَشْهَادِ. We shall give victory to our messengers as well as the believers in this world, as well as when the souls are resurrected on the Day of Judgment. On the Day of Judgment, obviously God achieves full victory. But God says victory will begin in this life, in this world, not just in the afterlife. Yes? It's here. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll take yours after, inshallah.
Thank you. Syed, during your majlis today, you mentioned that the Imam himself determines when we get up and take action or start a revolution. Because the Imam is in occultation right now, what's our primary social political responsibility as Shias?
During the occultation, we're not left to ourselves. Right? At the end of the day, the Imam himself says, Imam al-Hasan al-Askari famously says in this hadith, وَأَمَّا الْحَوَادِثُ الْوَاقِعَةِ, meaning new developments and new challenges and new problems that you have not faced before, what do? فَارْجِعُوا فِيهَا إِلَى رُوَاتِ أَحَادِيثِنَا. You go back and refer to those who narrate our traditions, right? Which is interesting because the Imam doesn't say, go back to the jurists, because obviously they'd have to be jurists, they'd have to know the law inside and out. But the Imam specifically says, those who narrate our traditions. In another tradition, the Imam says, مَنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْفُقَهَاءِ صَائِنًا لِنَفْسِهِ مُخَالِفًا لِهَوَاهِ مُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَاهِ فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوهُ. A jurist that you're supposed to emulate and follow is one who has these qualities. They need to check these points. Number one, مَنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْفُقَهَاءِ صَائِنًا لِنَفْسِهِ. One who guards himself against sin and against transgression and whatnot. مُخَالِفًا لِهَوَاهِ. Resists his temptations. مُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَاهِ. Obeys his master, meaning the Imams. فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوهُ. The laymen and the people who are not experts in the field of jurisprudence can follow that person. Which means that whether it's social and political upheavals or anything to do with us as individuals, we have to refer to those scholars. We refer to those ulama. That's why when Ayatollah Syed Sistani, may Allah bless him and prolong his life, when he issued the edict in Iraq for people to take up arms with some very specific, rigid outlines, everyone rose up. And it's incredible if you think about it, brothers and sisters. Mosul is Iraq's second biggest city. It's almost entirely Sunni, right? And it has something like if I'm not mistaken, 3.5 million residents. It's a massive city. and yet it was taken over by ISIS literally overnight. Overnight, it fell to ISIS control, right? Then you have a tiny little village called Amirli. Have you heard that name before? Iraqis would know this. Amirli is a tiny village of about 30,000 adherents. This city resisted ISIS for 3 months. Men were fighting, women were fighting. Everyone went out there, and their call to action was Labbayka ya Hussain. The difference between Amirli and Mosul is that Amirli followed this motto, Labbayka ya Hussain, and they followed the edict of the ulama and the Mirage. My uncle was the first to issue the fatwa. Grand Ayatollah Modaressi, he issued the fatwa against ISIS. Then Ayatollah Sistani followed about, I think, a day or a day and a half after that. And then the other Mirage joined in. And of course, with Sayyid Sistani coming to the scene, everything changed, right? Everyone went out and they started resisting ISIS. And that was the end of ISIS, right? ISIS was defeated in Iraq. People take that for granted. ISIS is still there in Syria, right? ISIS, even though they took over like a third of the country, and yet it was thanks to these maraja and these ulama that they were defeated once and for all. So what do? We refer to the maraja, we refer to the ulama who have those qualities and those points checked. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you.
Ahsant.
Assalamu alaikum. Regarding
Assalamu
what you just talked about, the Mirages and the Ulamas, we see a little conflict being presented in our communities these days regarding how we shouldn't be following these ulama because they're corrupt. As us youth, a lot of us are actually trying to fight against that. What would you advise us for people trying to basically say these kind of things to us?
Let me be blunt.
Please do.
Anyone who has ever made a false claim throughout our history, right? All those imposters and deviants and liars and cheaters, while they may have different philosophies and different messages, each one is obviously trying to carve a space for himself. Each one's trying to get more attention towards himself or herself. But there's one consistent thread that connects all of them. And I've actually studied this as a phenomenon, right? Like even in this day and age, I don't want to mention names, but there's a bunch of imposters out there who are trying to sort of garner support for themselves. And again, they may be going in different direction, but there is one consistent theme in their messages. And it always starts with undermining the religious institution. That's the one thing they all have in common. And the reason for that is because, well, obviously, if you're going to make yourself the infantile center of the universe, if you're going to create some position of prominence for yourself, you have to start by attacking the other ulama, so that all of a sudden you become the antidote, right? You become the solution to that problem. And so this is nothing new. We've always struggled with people trying to undermine the position of the scholars and the ulama and the jurists of the Ahlul Bayt and the narrators of the hadith and the maraja, what we call maraja today, right? So, this is normal. It's nothing new. It's not a new phenomenon. So I'm not too worried about it. Because at the end of the day, there's an Arabic proverb that says the caravan will keep moving even if the dogs bark, right? They'll try and they'll, huff and they'll puff, but at the end of the day, right, the maraja, and I'm not saying, by the way, that every single claimant of marja'iyya is pure and righteous, right? Of course, there are imposters even within that group. We've had them. Ali al-Bata'ini, the one that I mentioned earlier, was, I think, if not at the position of a marja', what we call a marja' today, he was probably even higher than that because he was the Imam's special envoy, the special representative of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far. And yet he turned out to be a corrupt liar, right? So of course there may be scholars who claim to be maraja', but they're lying. But in general, as a whole, the religious establishment that is backed and supported by our maraja', our righteous, pious maraja' and ulama, is there to stay. and I wouldn't be too worried about it. I think it is important that we connect people back to these maraja, because at the end of the day, they hold the fort, right? They're the ones who ultimately give us the fatwas and tell us right from wrong vis-a-vis religious instructions. So it's critical that especially the youth are connected back to the ulama. In fact, I'll tell you something, which, you know, I probably shouldn't say it in a public forum, but I think it's important. And that is that I personally have this extremely high regard for all of the maraja, which is something that's kind of missing, I feel. So there's this sense of tribalism between us, whereby a group that follows this marja will always look negatively on another group that follows another marja. And this is something that, you know, we've had for a long time. But I subscribe to a school which actually allows people to follow a marja, who then allows us to follow all the other maraja, to simply pick and choose between the maraja, right? So Ayatollah Modaressi believes in a concept known as tab'id. And what tab'id means is essentially you can pick and choose between the maraja as long as you're not doing purely out of trying to find loopholes or trying to do that one thing that you've longed to do, that random marja happens to allow or validate, right? As long as it's, you know, you're following these different maraja, each one is trying to address a specific problem, for example, that's perfectly fine according to Ayatollah Modaressi, not the other maraja. Other maraja have this very specific instruction that you need to follow only one person. The problem is, though, that there is a lack of scriptural evidence to back that position, right? There is a logical evidence which says that ideally you should follow one marja, because if you follow more than one marja, it'll just be really confusing and people will follow different people and whatnot. But there is a lack of scriptural evidence to back that, which we'll leave that discussion for another day. But my point is that I feel that I've developed this newfound respect for all the maraja now, because ultimately they're all relatively equally qualified, right? It's very difficult to ascertain which one is the single most knowledgeable. And even if you could, at the end of the day, the difference between the most knowledgeable and the next person in the line would be very minimal, right? We're not talking about someone who is qualified and someone who is disqualified, right? We're talking about people who are generally quite, you know, similar in terms of their views and in terms of their understanding of Scripture. So my point is, whether you follow that doctrine or not, we respect the maraja, we respect the ulama, and people who are trying to undermine them, let's not worry too much about that, inshallah.
In this day and age, as we all work really hard to raise our children on the right path, what are your best 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give to us as we try to keep ourselves and our children on the right path, whether that's specific du'as to recite or practices or habits to put in place in our homes?
So I'll mention a couple of really quick points. The first is, and I think this is by far the most important advice that I hope to be able to apply myself and as well as the mu'mineen, and that is just be the best, most pious, most religious version of yourself. Because our kids will mimic and emulate us more than what we tell them to do. You can tell them to be the most moral people, but if they see you going in a different direction, then you know you better be sure that that they're not going to listen to your words, but rather follow what you show them. And you know, it goes without saying that if you have immoral parents, the children will almost always turn out to be immoral themselves, right? And so to be extra vigilant, extra careful for us as parents to be good moral examples and ethical role models for our kids. Number one. Number two, what I would advise, and this is, of course, all these are no-brainers. I really don't have to say these things, but they're good as reminders, I guess, is to associate good deeds with good memories. And sometimes we kind of neglect that, I guess. I mean, just as a simple example, oftentimes I would take my family and the kids to a lecture, for example. And then on the way back, I'd get them some ice cream. And the reason is, if they consistently associate a religious activity like going to the mosque with ice cream, right, this will automatically draw a link between these two things. And the pleasure of the ice cream will trump the pain of having to listen to Mahdi Modaressi for an hour and a half. And it'll be something that they, sort of enjoy doing subconsciously without really thinking about it. It'll be a fun thing to go to the mosque. One thing I've always been super comfortable with is for children to be in the main hall during the lecture. Even if they run around a little bit, I know it's distracting and some people hate it, but I always say, listen, the kids have to be in these environments. These are, positive, great ambiances where, we believe the angels of Allah are here. We believe that at the end of the day, these are places where we want our children to be and to bring their own children, in 20, 30 years' time as well. So associate good, like I remember there was this lecture series that I did back in Sydney, Australia, where after each majlis, they'd have a barbecue. And everyone would go outside. Like it's once a week, it's not a huge deal. Everyone would go outside and they'd grab a sandwich, and it's a really fun, nice little activity. So that concept of associationism, I think, is critical. I mean, the other example that I've cited in my lectures before, which is how my father used to wake us up for Fajr prayers. People who have listened to me before would be familiar with this. And the way he would wake us up for Fajr prayers consistently every single time, including until now, right? And I know it's kind of embarrassing, but if I, for whatever reason, spend the night in my parents' home, they still do this. So essentially, he would walk into the room and he'd be reading this beautiful dua, this dhikr that you recite early in the mornings, which is Sabbahna, Asbahna wa asbah al-mulku lillahi al-wahid al-qahhar. And then he would have, he prepares a fruit platter, essentially, a fruit cocktail with, thinly sliced pieces of apple and mandarins and, orange or whatever that's available. And then he would put those in our mouth, right, as he's reading that dhikr or as he's reciting the adhan. And it's just such a fun thing to have someone do that to you. And so, you wake up with beautiful, delicious, sweet fruit in your mouth. I mean, what more could you want? And again, that creates that association between Fajr and that sweet nectar of fruit, So I think that's also important. I don't want to go to talk too much about this, but I did give a couple of lectures last year and a couple of lectures this year about child rearing and about child discipline, which I'd refer you to those, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. SIJNY, last question.
Sure.
One more.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, everybody here and everybody who's a Shia Muslim has always been taught from a young age that when the Imam returns, he will bring justice everywhere in the world and there will be no injustice left. So when he's doing that, when will it be like when he's fighting against all the injustice in the world, like as we always see that there's a lot of it throughout the world, there's a lot of injustice. So will he fight against that with force or like with diplomacy or any other way?
It'll be a combination of both. I mean, you can stop oppression and have people join your cause en masse, meaning in the millions and billions, to join Imam al-Zaman by coming at the right time and by showing them that there is divine intervention happening, there is justice that's about to be implemented when they themselves are going through unspeakable injustice and oppression. And that's where the world is headed, right? There's more and more injustice. And I'm not just talking about injustice in terms of death and murder and carnage and bloodshed, but also social injustice, also moral injustice, those kinds of things. There will be a point when humanity reaches boiling point, and the human race will realize that all their systems, all their structures, political structures, have failed miserably. And there is nothing we can do to solve it. There's nothing we as humans can do to fix the system. It's clogged beyond repair. It's broken. And so when the Imam comes, everyone will flock to him. Everyone will join his cause, right? However, there are those that you can't really reason with, right? You can't exactly hold a roundtable discussion with like the leaders of ISIS and say, let's debate this and see who convinces. I mean, these are people. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi openly said that you should know that we're coming to Karbala because we have scores to settle. So a person like that, the only way to defeat him is with the sword, right? The only way to do that is to do what the Prophet did and what Amir al-Mu'mineen did, right? Which is to fight. Of course, there's a degree of force that has to be utilized in order to eliminate the root causes of the oppression and injustice. The people you can't reason with, the Hitlers of the world, and the oppressors, and the tyrants, and the despots. Ahsantum. Jazakumullah khair. Once again, it's been a blast being here, alhamdulillah, meeting the community after quite a long time. But you have a wonderful community, mashallah, with a lot of potential. I see a lot of young people here, right? This potential needs to be tapped into. This potential needs to be translated into action in terms of service for Imam al-Zaman, service for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and inshallah, early marriage. Do not forget that. Have lots and lots of children, inshallah, and just try and double this community by this time next year. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
I will request the sisters to go back to their hall now, please. Yeah, go back to your... Yeah. Sorry. No, later. I have to finish the program. I have to finish the program, so please. I'm sorry, I have to finish the program. Sister, I have to finish my program. So please, can we go over there, please? Thank you.